Now, if you know what the fish are eating, one fly is always great to fish with, but you can also fish with two flies. This doubles your chances to catch more fish, and it helps you determine what the fish might be eating if there's a number of different food sources for those fish. To do that, I get a piece of tippet and I tie the tippet on the shank of the hook, right on the bend on the back. I'll tie that tippet then to my second fly through the eyelet. And that allows me to do a little prospecting to figure out what the fish might be eating or double my chances to catch a fish. Today I've got a stonefly nymph imitation, as well as an imitation that could imitate a smaller stonefly or a mayfly, so I'll be trying both. So again, when you're fishing nymphs or wet flies underneath the water, you'll need your strike indicator and you'll need your fly. But how far distance do you put between the strike indicator and your fly? A good rule of thumb is to go 1.5 lengths the depth of the water. So if you have 2 feet of water, you'll want to go 3 feet from your strike indicator to your fly. There's really a couple different ways you can use strike indicators. One way is to just fold the line in half, feed it through the eyelet, and then just loop it around the strike indicator. Once it's looped around, you can just pull it tight and you've got your strike indicator. Now, when you're setting the depth of your strike indicator to the first fly, a good rule of thumb, again, is 1.5 lengths the depth of the water. But if you're fishing really deep water, you won't want to go more than 6 feet from your strike indicator to your first fly because it becomes unmanageable to cast. And if you're reeling in, you won't be able to reel past the strike indicator if it hits the end of your rod tip. If you're fishing with dry flies and you know what the fish are eating, it's always fun and easy to fish with one fly. But sometimes there's lots of different insects out there flying and floating on the water, and you may want to consider fishing 2 flies. The same is true as with nymphing. You'll want to tie the tippet from the back of the hook shank on the first fly to the eyelet of the second fly. Now, when you're fishing with 2 flies, I like to go 12 to 18 inches worth of tippet. You'll not want to go any further than that because it becomes unmanageable to cast. The other way you can fish is you can fish dry flies and wet flies at the same time. This dry fly will float on the water and this wet fly will float underneath the water. Now, I won't need a strike indicator because I'll use my dry fly as the strike indicator that if a fish eats the fly, whoop, it'll pull my dry fly down and I'll know a fish is on the wet fly. Now that we're on the water, let's talk a little bit about fishing techniques. The first thing you want to think about is you want to present your fly to the fish so that it appears as if it's natural bait. Now, in order to do that, you're going to want to cast upstream from the fish and allow that fish to see the fly coming down the stream. If you're fishing wet flies or nymphs like I am today, you're also going to want to let that fly sink down to the fish before it gets to where he's at. So if you don't allow time for that fly to sink, it'll just float right over its head. One thing you'll notice is as my flies are floating downstream, I'm picking up the line and setting it a little bit downstream. What I'm doing there is called mending, and that allows your fly to float naturally as if there's not any fly line attached to it. Now, conversely, if you don't allow a mend to happen, your line will start to pull awkwardly across the stream, and it won't be a natural presentation to the fish. So at times you're going to be picking up your line and mending downstream, as I am in this little slower water where it's faster out there. Sometimes you'll actually be picking up the line and setting it upstream to allow that mend and natural float to occur. Now, as I'm looking at this hole where I'm fishing, you know, there may be fish 10 feet from me, there may be fish 15 feet from me, there may be fish 20 feet from me. So when I come up to a spot like this, what I do is I start fishing the water that's closest to me first, and I'll fish the water that's 10 feet from me, and I'll get a few drifts. Now, if you like where you're fishing, don't be afraid to let a few drifts go through the same spot. Once I've determined that maybe there's not any fish in that zone, then I'll cast a little further out, and I'll fish the water that's 15 feet from me. Mending and being conscious to try to get a nice natural drift. My bobber went down, it might have been a fish or it might have been the bottom, but that's how you know you're getting to where you want to be. Now, the other thing I want you to notice is as I'm fishing, I'm constantly managing the slack because I'm casting upriver and those flies are coming closer to me. So to manage the slack, you want to be pulling in the line as it comes closer to you. Now, the reason we do that is that when I set the hook, I want that hook to come tight on the fish immediately. If there's a lot of slack out there, I'll lift my rod and it doesn't come tight onto the fish. So as your flies are coming close to you, make sure you're pulling that line in and keeping the ability to come tight on the fish if you do have a strike. If I am fishing here, when I cast, I know probably the first 15 or 20 feet, my flies are still sinking down. So it's about this point where I start thinking, okay, now I'm fishing and there may be fish. And I'm really trying to fish this water here, but casting up higher to present my flies before they need to be where the fish might be at. Now, as I move up this hole, I'm gonna step up upstream, and I'm gonna repeat that process to fish the close water 10 feet from me, and I'll fish that zone. If there's no fish, I'll lengthen my cast, and I'll fish the water 15 feet from me, try to get a good natural drift, and if I don't catch anything, or if I do catch anything, then I'll go to the next zone, which might be 20 feet from me. One other thing you'll notice is as I cast, I'm trying to keep my rod tip pointed to my strike indicator where my flies are. That allows me to know how much slack I have in the line, and it also helps create a good drift, and it also allows me, if a fish was to eat, I can lift up on my rod and set the hook. There's a couple different ways you can reset your cast once you're at the end of your drift. You can always flop the line back up, and you could fish from there, or you could cast again and place it where you'd like. Now, when you are nymphing, you may see a really slight bobble or wiggle of your strike indicator. Often that could be a fish. It may be your flies hitting the bottom, but either way, if you see that strike indicator move any way that's unnatural, you're gonna wanna set the hook and see if that might be a fish. Okay, so as you're managing the line, and if you do catch a fish, what I'm doing to take in that slack is I'm actually putting it underneath my trigger finger. And when I put it underneath my trigger finger, I can pull it, and then I pinch the line with my trigger finger, and I come from behind my hand. Let me cast this out again. I come from behind my hand, let go with my trigger finger, pull in line, and pinch it. That way I've always got a stop, either in this hand or on my trigger finger, that if I get bit, I can come up and come tight on that fish. Most fish are lost when there's too much slack in the line, or you lose the stop on the line slipping out from the reel or your hand. That way, when you come tight on a fish, you're fighting the fish here, and if you need to reel it in, we don't typically use our reel, we just pull the fish in the same way we're managing our slack.